As in there. Okay, so I think I'm ready.
All right, just give me a second.
Yeah.
Okay, we are live. I'm back here once again with Jeff McLaren, and we're going to do part 3 of Zizek's book. What's the name of the book? Oh, Living in the End Times.
Living in the End Times.
All right.
Capitalism.
Of capitalism.
Playing on the religious fundamentalist notion of the end times of humanity, I guess, and talking about capitalism. So, living in the end times of capitalism. So he's playing on the religious fundamentalist notion of the end times of humanity, I guess, and talking about capitalism. So he, just as a summary of what we've done so far, he believes that there are 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that are coming, and they include things like the biogenic revolution, the disparities between rich and poor, capitalism's inequality, and stuff like that. And he thinks it's going to bring us to an end. These are the typical communist ideology that says there's contradictions in capitalism and it's going to have to end eventually. So in order to bring the end of capitalism a little closer, people have to be, in a sense, prepared for it. And he thinks that the usual procession of grief is a good model to explain what society needs to go through in order to finally accept communism in the end. And just to be clear, everything I say here is based on what I understand Zizek to be saying. It shouldn't be portrayed or thought of as actually being what I would espouse. But so he starts off, there's 5 stages of grief. So it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So in the first 2 sessions, we got through the first 3. Today, we're going to do the last 2, depression and acceptance. So his second last chapter, which he calls Depression, he subtitles the neuronal, that's a funny word, trauma, neuronal, something to do with the brain, I guess, trauma, or the rise of the proletarian cogito. Neurological, it's not neurological, it's neuronal trauma, or the rise of the proletarian cogito. So again, remember, he's going through these stages in an attempt to move you to the next stage. So if you're in denial, he wants to sort of put in there, not directly, but sort of subconsciously, that you need to move on, kind of stuff. And same with anger and bargaining. It's not gonna, anger's not going to work, bargaining's not going to work. Sort of hint at that without being direct. So with depression, he's also following the same tactic, and he wants to show how those of us who think we are advanced really aren't as advanced as we think we are, especially when it comes to, I guess, Western supremacy in terms of religious freedoms. So let's begin. So where authentic pre-modern society was almost destroyed by modernity through the shift from the organic whole to universality, that is, self-contained, self-sufficient little towns and villages with their own unique culture, were brought into the modern and integrated nation state, and then finally a capitalist system. Like, what happened, according to him, is there was a unique culture in small towns, small regions, and it was rationalized. It was brought into the modern world, oftentimes kicking and screaming, with the goal of making everything similar or very much the same into the capitalist world, and it's been very successful. But what has been lost is part of the issue. Then that's the modern thing. They got to the capitalist. Postmodernity is the overcoming of modernity, but it's fulfillment. It's not the overcoming of modernity, but it's fulfillment. So for Zizek, postmodernity is just the final stage of modernity before communism. And that's sort of the hint that he wants to get at. So postmodernity, the postmodern universe, pre-modern leftovers are no longer experienced as obstacles to be overcome by progress towards a fully secularized modernization. So if in the past people did things kind of in a backwards way, or we look at the past and say, oh, they did things backwards. I mean, they didn't know better. They had their superstitions. And we know better today. He's saying, no, not really the case. Religion's still around, for example. So postmodern, these leftovers are no longer experienced as obstacles to overcome. In the 19th and 20th century, you might have thought, okay, religion's on the decline or should be on the decline. It's just a matter of time before we educate people out of this prehistoric or pre-modern mythology or superstition. But it's still here. So he's basically saying we're not trying to destroy it anymore. We're trying to be fulfilled with it. So where was I? So it's not something to be, but it is something to be unproblematically incorporated into the multicultural global universe. All traditions, he claims, survive, but in a mediated, denaturalized form, that is, no longer as authentic ways of life, but as freely chosen lifestyles. So in other words, all the pre-modern religious superstitions that modernity tried and failed to wipe out are now being destroyed successfully by postmodernity by turning them into decontextualized life choices. This means that in the postmodern world, it is okay to believe in creationism and be a biologist, right? So most modern people would look and say, how can you go to church and believe in creationism, the idea like that the earth is like 6,000 years old, dinosaurs didn't make it on the ark or whatever, and still be a biologist where you believe in the theory of evolution, you see evolution, and you work with biological scientific truths. That would have been a contradiction for a modern. For a postmodern, it's not a problem. It's just a lifestyle choice. I choose to believe this, and I choose to believe this for my job. So belief in God and being a natural scientist, all these kind of contradictions, they're okay in the postmodern world. The fundamental difference between compelled and unchosen pre-modern beliefs and today's lifestyle choices is the lack of compulsion. So in the pre-modern world, you were sort of forced, either by necessity or by somebody in power, to believe a certain way. He gives a later example, which we'll get to eventually, is for a long time in Western culture, the subjects of a particular principality were the same religion as their prince. And when the prince changed, they may have to change their religion. That kind of notion doesn't really matter anymore. It was very important back then at the dawn of the modern age. It says postmodernity has decided to try a different tact, and it's much more successful
like in
than
the
the modern tact, which is to try and destroy religion. We're going to keep it, but not as an authentic way of life, but as a lifestyle choice. Does that make sense?
Right, and that don't really
yes, precisely, and there's room for every one of them because they're all devalued in that way. Devalued to the point of being lifestyle choices as opposed to being fundamental identities which you're willing to die for. So without compulsion, exactly, yes. So in the past, people who were of the wrong religion or the prince was of the wrong religion, it was threatening to them because they felt they had the truth and it was worth dying for. There's a lot more martyrs in the past, by the way. There's very few people who are willing to die for their religion today. There are a few, but they're probably modern or pre-modern. But the postmodern, I'll change my lifestyle. Thank you.
To fight the George Soros funded leftist conspiracy of satanic pedophiles.
So I think you could say that that's well, we'll get to that towards the end of the acceptance chapter, but as a hint to where he's going, I think he would say that's so I think he would say that that's well, we'll get to that towards the end of in the acceptance chapter, but as a hint to where he's going, I think he would say that's not destroying postmodernity. That anybody's going to change when they got a gun facing them.
I mean, I'm not
a real martyr doesn't.
I'm changing.
So if I say to you, here, I got a gun pointing at you, and I say, change your beliefs, you're no longer an anarchist. Would you say yes or no? It's a lifestyle choice. If you change your mind, Yeah, exactly. And most people change because our beliefs in the modern or in the postmodern capitalist world are lifestyle choices. They are not authentically compulsed life or death identities. Does that make sense? So the notion that, well, he touches on this briefly. Um, the notion of being gay or straight. If I put a gun to your head, you'll do what I say, essentially, right? That's a lifestyle choice. It's not as serious as somebody who's willing to literally die for their, like willingly, as opposed to by accident or by happenstance, die for their beliefs. And that makes us all rather shallow in the postmodern world because we're not really serious about what we claim to be serious about. I mean, do you know anybody who is really willing to die for their choices? Yeah. Yeah, even soldiers today don't talk about dying for their country as the greatest thing to be done. Like I'm thinking of ancient Spartans.
Right. Well, I mean,
they looked to die
we need
for
those
their
believers
country, right?
to
They
win.
thought they were looking for a
So
beautiful death
we
if they
gotta,
could find somebody who was
we're doing
up
our
for the
best
challenge, for
to create
example.
them, bring them back.
Yeah, that doesn't exist today, right? So
Yeah, it's tough.
people who are willing to die for their beliefs are also quite dangerous, right? They're willing to kill for their beliefs. Yeah, you're slim pickings, I imagine. Because people who are willing to die for their beliefs are also quite dangerous, right? They're willing to kill for their beliefs too, I imagine. Anyway, so that's part of the modern and pre-modern world that the postmodern world has, in a sense, conquered. Not conquered by eliminating, but by subverting, by reducing it from an authentic identity, which is very fragile, which is not very fragile, to something that is very fragile, a lifestyle choice. Okay? It's important to understand that there is compulsion everywhere. So it's not a matter of better or worse compulsion. It's better thought of as a question of more or less livable compulsion. So there's compulsion today, there's compulsion in the past. If you were in a small town, the constraints that are put on you as a result of peer pressure and societal pressure are probably just as good, they're just different, right? And we are probably a lot weaker than they were in the past because very few people are willing to die for their beliefs or their lifestyle choices. So what does this mean? This tension between the modern, the pre-modern, and the postmodern, Zizek wants to, gives an example of this. And so I'm going to be quoting from his book here. He gave several, but this was the one that I felt was kind of cool, actually. So one particular example is in the conflict between China and the Tibetan Buddhists, which is similar to the European development of religious toleration. So are you familiar with how China is treating Tibetan Buddhists? Are you familiar with the conflict between China and the Dalai Lama? Okay, so here's how he looks at it. So first consider the drama that in August 2007, okay, this is, and here's I'm quoting from the book. The Chinese State Administration of Religious Affairs passed Order Number 5, which covered the management measures for the reincarnation of living Buddhas in Tibetan Buddhism. Does that make sense? So in August 2007, and I remember this, I was in Korea and I heard about this and thought, oh, that's kind of crazy sounding. So the state, the Chinese state, an official body of the Chinese state called the of Religious Affairs, passed a special order, number 5. And within this set of orders, it's a set of orders actually, the management measures for the reincarnation of living Buddhas in Tibetan Buddhism.
Amazing.
So the Chinese state is taking upon itself the power to decide who gets reincarnated and when and how. Okay. Now, okay. So, yes. Well, okay. Wait till they see the twist. Okay. And there's several twists in this story. Okay. This, he continues, this is Zizek, this important move to institutionalize the management of reincarnation stipulates the procedures by which one is to reincarnate. In short, it prohibits Buddhist monks from reincarnating without government permission. Further, no one outside China can influence the reincarnation process.
It's a beautiful trick.
Only monasteries inside China can apply for permission. Does that sound kind of crazy to you? Well, they had Western civilization to copy, as we're about to see. That's part of the twist. So Zizek claims that early modern Europeans did similar things. He cites the Peace of Ansberg in 1555, which was one of the first steps to the Peace of Westphalia, which declared the local prince's religion to be the official religion of a region. So, however, when a new ruler of a different religion took power, large groups of people had to convert. You see a connection there, or a similarity. The state is decided, here's what he claims, the first big institutional move towards religious tolerance in modern Europe thus involved the paradox of the same type as Chinese Order Number 5. Religious belief, supposedly a matter of the individual's inner spiritual experience, is to be regulated at the whim of a secular prince. Right? So this was happening in Europe like 500 years ago. And in a sense, the Chinese have copied that. Okay? So this means that China is in fact supporting religion. China has seen that religion, properly managed, can support social harmony, which is one of the overriding concerns. Does that make sense? Of capitalism, in fact, as we're about to see. Because if you manage it like this and you change it into a lifestyle choice, it's very easy to manage. And we're about to see that the lessons that are being learned here and that we are benefiting, or I guess benefiting from in a great sense here in the West, China is going to achieve for itself very soon, maybe in a generation or two. So, but the story gets deeper. Okay, so where is it? Okay, but there's a further plot twist, as the Dalai Lama's dealing with China's order chose a modern response. So China's supporting a pre-modern response, reincarnation as the way to do it, and here are the ways to do it. The Dalai Lama decided to choose a more modern, as a response to the Chinese power grab, Order Number 5, he chose a very modern response. Here's what he did. So remember, this started in August 2007. In November 2007, in reaction to the announced Chinese legislation, the Dalai Lama proclaimed that his successor would probably not be chosen by reincarnation, but by more modern democratic means. He suggested that some kind of representative religious body, like the conclave in the Vatican, should select his successor. This is like documented evidence, right? Or proof. The Dalai Lama is saying that the next reincarnation of the Dalai Lama should be proclaimed, his successor should be proclaimed, should be chosen not by reincarnation, but by modern democratic means. And the Vatican is an example of that. The Pope is chosen by the cardinals, right? And only from the cardinals, right? So this time, it was the Chinese government which counterattacked by defending reincarnation as the method of choice, accusing the Dalai Lama of abandoning ancient Tibetan traditions because of a vested political interest. Okay, so yes. So note the irony. The Dalai Lama, who is the head of state of a theocracy, right? He is the head of state of theocracy, sort of like the Pope.
Oh, are we back?
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, I was about to ask what was happening. Okay, so what was the last thing you heard?
How the Chinese government went around the backs of the Dalai Lama and the Tibetans to basically manipulate their own religion and control them through the state power.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, so that's the technique. You manage it, but then the process of actually doing that in the capitalist world is changing it from an authentic managed choice. That's what happens when you start to regulate this kind of stuff. It serves the interest of social calm, social peace, but it destroys the religion. The religion becomes a tool of the state in a sense, and social harmony benefits from this.
Well,
Does that make sense?
For the state, yes, it's all about control in this case.
Yeah. Yes. But the same thing is happening. So here, the Dalai Lama is stuck, right? If he doesn't do something different, the Chinese state with its power, the guns, will control the next one. So he has to challenge that. And by challenging that, he destroys what he's trying to save, because he's attaching no longer reincarnation as such, but a democratic election, which is pretty much the antithesis of a theocratic state that he's trying to run.
Idea.
Yeah, exactly. Again, both are arguing and destroying religion at the same time. Destroying it in its authenticity, right. I should say. Some might say it's just being adapted. It's adapting, but when it adapts into a lifestyle choice, and anybody can, oh yeah, I'm Buddhist. Oh, you got a gun on my face. No, I'm not Buddhist. Never have been. That kind of stuff. It was just a joke. That there's a certain authenticity that's lost because it's not serious, and that's a good thing for social harmony. Not so much for the religion itself. So the Chinese government, as it moves into the postmodern world, is relying less and less on primitive, and here he uses this word, primitive totalitarian tools and techniques, and is rather using the tools and techniques of capitalism to thwart the Tibetan people's traditional lives. And here he's got like sort of almost a rhetorical irony in this next quote. This is what Zizek says. What the media images of brutal Chinese soldiers terrorizing Buddhist monks conceals is the much more effective American-style socioeconomic transformation. Within a decade or two, Tibetans will be reduced to the same status as that of Native Americans in the United States. It seems that the Chinese communists have finally learned the lesson. What is the oppressive power of secret police, prison camps, and red guards destroying ancient monuments compared to the power of unbridled capitalism to undermine all traditional social relations? Right? This is something that Marx would also said. He grudgingly was talking about capitalism, or in his case, the bourgeoisie mentality, the bourgeoisie movement, to undermine all social relationships and bring it all down to the cash nexus, right? The reducing everything to a value based on dollars, and that, according to Zizek, and because he's a Marxist, he's a communist. This is evidence of its far superior power to regulate people than what he calls the primitive totalitarian tools. So, for example, in China, they would have been secret police, prison camps, red guards, and destroying monuments. It doesn't work. The modern world showed that. But capitalism does it beautifully, and it destroys and undermines all social relations.
Yeah, that
makes sense so far?
So
So remember, this is supposed to be challenging your depression, moving you along to
Okay, how so?
acceptance. Okay. Well, if what he's saying is true, is like, oh my God, we really need to go beyond the depression. It's like,
Right,
okay, I'm just going to have to accept this, aren't I? Okay, so perhaps we find China's reincarnation laws so outrageous, not because they are alien to our sensibilities, but because they spell out so openly the secret of what we are all up to. Are not the Chinese doing only what all civilized governments do, respectfully tolerating what they do not quite take seriously, while trying to contain its possible political consequences through legislation? That's what they're doing. They're regulating what they don't quite take seriously, okay? And it's fundamentally changing it. Consider how our Canadian government is dealing with First Nations claims. Yeah, okay, we'll humor you. Don't expect much, though. We're not giving back Vancouver kind of thing, but, you know, we'll give you something. It would seem that all the evils in the world can be viewed as our own reflection. That's the depressing thing, right? If there's anything wrong in the world, it's because it's because of our lifestyle. It's intimately connected. He gives lots of other examples. The point being that we are making the world in our own image, and if there are problems in it, that is technically our fault. We are the ones who are imposing this violence on them. And he says that in a different book in a different context. It's our consumer mentality is pretty much destroying the world.
But our consumer mentality is also a product of our material conditions. It's not like individuals came up with this consumerism on their own. It's what's beneficial to.
Yeah, he doesn't get too much into that, but I've read in another book, I think that he's very Marxist. I mean, we have to go through this stage before we can get to communism. So we didn't do it, but we did. I don't think he would say that there was a conscious effort. It was just the natural outgrowth.
Well, right.
Definitely, Marx would say that. I mean, he thought it would happen a lot sooner.
That, like, you know, people were saying that during this pandemic that, you know, the real virus is humans and humanity, but that's not quite true. The virus is the system. Oh,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm having you're coming in and out.
I have to apologize to the viewers again here because my computer is completely screwed again. I don't know what happened, and I can't seem to fix it. It's after a Windows update, and now it's all slowed down. So, yeah. I guess I just won't talk much.
Okay. Sorry to hear that. Okay. Anyway, he's basically saying that capitalism is a great tool for social stability, even if it is in itself unstable and is likely to destroy the world. So that finished that second last chapter, and then he had an interlude, which he called Apocalypse at the Gates. So here he spent a lot of time on three things. One news item, the sound of music, and Freud's totem and taboo. There was a story, I remember hearing about this and then reading about it again, it brought it back to memory. It was a guy in Austria named Joseph Fritzl. Have you heard of this guy? Here's what he says. Okay, well, we'll get to him in a second. But he starts off with Totem and Taboo, one of the books of Freud. Gives his account of the origin of religion and the incest taboo in the myth of the killing of the primordial father by his sons who wanted sexual access to the women of the tribe. The primordial father, who used to protect the children, was then elevated to a god by his frightened children as a sort of appeasement for their patricide. the work has been widely discredited as a work of anthropology, but Zizek says, well, Freud wasn't an anthropologist. Don't be stupid. It's not a work of anthropology, all right? Freud was a psychologist, and the book should be looked at as, quote, libidinal fact, a fact about psychic reality which accompanies normal patterns, paternal authority, paternal authority, like its obscene shadow prospering in the murky depths of unconscious fantasy. So here's his claim. The notion that everybody kills their father because they want access to women, and then are scared that that father will come back and kill them or hurt them. So they immortalize him as a god and revere him in order to chase away those anxieties. He says it's not. Zizek says that Freud never meant you to think that this actually happened sometime in the past. He wants you to think that it happens every single day in every single person. It's the nature of your libidinal bringing psychic reality. It's your psychic reality, and it accompanies, and he puts in quotes, normal paternal authority. So anybody who's got a paternal authority, whether it be their mother or their father, who's ever the stronger in the relationship, or the one who's most likely to, exercise traditional paternal authority, is the one who suffers this. I mean, you want to, in a sense, kill that authority. And eventually you succeed because you move out, you leave the family unit, and you start your own. He refers to this as an obscene shadow because nobody talks about this in polite company. And remember, Freud had some other funny things to go along with it, but Zizek claims that he was right on with his totem and taboo. Okay, and it's there in all our subconscious fantasies, and here he does, or unconscious. He uses the word unconscious fantasy. The subconscious is not one that Freud used, meaning that it's there and it manifests itself in a whole range of things. Now he's going to give two examples of how it's manifested in this particular news article and in Hollywood kitsch, such as The Sound of Music, the movie The Sound of Music. So the first case is the Joseph Fritzl case. It's about a father that imprisoned his daughter, Elizabeth, under his house and fathered several children with her while keeping a normal family in the upper part of the house. Did you ever hear about this story? No? Okay, it happened in Austria. What makes his reign so chilling is precisely the way his exercise of power and control of the daughter were not just cold acts of exploitation, but were accompanied by an ideological, familial justification. So apparently Zizek listened to this guy a lot and his testimony, and because he was tried and all that kind of stuff. And he wasn't a cold monster. I mean, he was apparently quite a nice guy who cared deeply for a lot of people, or appeared to care. We would say appeared to care, but what he's saying is that he genuinely cared. Right? We look at a monster who imprisons his daughter, rapes her, and produces children with her as a monster. Zizek is saying, no, it's not that simple. And the evidence came out that he was quite a caring man. We would say completely misguided and completely criminal, but it doesn't destroy the fact that he experienced and projected a caring attitude in many cases. So he had this ideological family justification. He did what a father should do, protecting his children from drugs and other dangers of the outside world. So as well as by occasional displays of compassion and human consideration, he gave several examples. He took her to the hospital and stuff like that. These acts were not small signs of humanity or in a big sea of coldness and cruelty, but expressions of the same protective attitude which led him to imprison and violate his children. Okay? This is hard for most moderns to understand because we separate actions from intentions and from feelings. But he's basically saying that the same feelings that lead any one of us normal people to follow the rules and have proper, acceptable social relations with intergenerational, intersexual relations, are the same ones that he used on his family.
Just to an extreme extent.
Okay, there's no difference except no, not even extreme. That's not that thing. It's they're the same. It's just that they were guided at the wrong object. So while if you look at a beautiful woman and you see she's beautiful and sexually attractive, that's great. Then you find out she's your mother. Then suddenly, whoa, does she lose her sexual attractiveness? No, it's part of like she hasn't changed at all. It's something in your brain has changed. The incest taboo takes over, right? Same with attraction at any level, right? That's what he's saying. It's there, but the object may be changed. And in this case, it was completely beyond the pale of normal. So in that sense, it's extreme, yes. The object that he chose was extreme because nobody is supposed to be sleeping with their daughter and bearing children with her. It was common in the ancient world. We heard of Oedipus, right? His sister and daughter, Antigone, right? What he's saying is, this guy isn't a monster inside because he's feeling the very same things that each and every one of us do. If he's liable, or which he is, if he's liable is for who he did it to.
So wait, if he had done that to someone else, it would be fine.
But even if he slept with somebody else, it would be fine. Not his daughter, right? Imprisoned? All children are imprisoned, right? I mean, little children can't leave and go on the street by themselves. They are, in a sense, in a very gentle prison. It's tolerable in our society. After a certain age, it becomes intolerable. For different people, it becomes at different ages, right? Some people need to be incarcerated for a little bit longer because they haven't quite adjusted. Everybody in that sense is different, but some are acceptable by our society and some are not. What he's claiming is that this guy is just like you and me and anybody else we know, and we are all just as we are just as capable of doing any grossly evil things that are labeled by the world as grossly evil. By recognizing that, it's first of all, it's a much safer world intellectually because you're not naively putting yourself into stupid situations. And you can be proactively protecting yourself. But it's also important to recognize that it's a dangerous world with that knowledge, right? So I guess one other example, he didn't touch on this, was the slut walks. There's a movement that says women should be able to dress any way they want, anytime they want, and not be assaulted. Oh, yes, that's very true in theory. The fact is that it's also very true that you probably can put your entire life savings on top of your car and go into Walmart, and you should expect to see it when you come back. It triggers people, and it's not a question of being controlled or not. The temptation is there. So be aware that anybody can be evil, not just like it's not just these monsters that we like to demonize and say they are so different from us. Anybody can be a monster. It's part of who we are. So second thing that he wants to say, he brings it now back to totem and taboo. Many people in other parts of the West, perhaps in embarrassment at how close to home Fritzl hits, try to think of the affair, or try to link the affair to Austria. This is an Austrian thing, they have their own culture, and it clearly creates monsters. However, Zizek says, one should just be aware that the excessive violence of the primordial father assumes in every particular culture certain specific phantasmic features. So he's saying, instead of the silly attempts to blame Joseph's terrible crime on Austria's past for its excessive sense of orderliness and outward show, we should rather link the figure of Fritzl to a much more respectable Austrian myth, that of the von Trapp family immortalized in The Sound of Music, which, he points out, is another family living in a secluded castle under a father's benevolent military authority, protecting them from the evil outside world, and with the generations strangely mixed. So if you recall, Sister Maria like Elizabeth, Fritzl's daughter, is a generation in between the father and the children. And he uses the word kitsch here. Aspect is relevant here. The sound of music is the ultimate kitsch phenomenon, and what Fritzl created in his basement also displays features of a realized kitsch family. Like the happy family getting ready for dinner, the father watching TV with children while the mother prepares the food. And here's his main point. However, one should not forget that the kitsch imagery we are dealing with here is not Austrian, but belongs to Hollywood and generally to Western popular culture. Why is it popular? Because it strikes at the fundamental fantasies that are common among all humanity. And the idea of killing the primordial father so you have access to the women is part of that. It's in our psyche, and he's talking men here, of course. Women might have a slightly different one. But so hence, Fritzl is not so much that different from us. He just chose a slightly different path, but it's, oh, sorry, not a different path. He chose the same path as we do. He just expressed it differently, which doesn't mean that he's not liable and that he didn't break the law. He certainly did. The law, in a sense, is meant to guide us along paths that are more socially acceptable. But what is socially acceptable can also change, and clearly has if you've read any of the Oedipus stuff, right? This wouldn't have been a problem in the time of Oedipus. So ludicrous as the sound of music is, as one of the worst cases of Hollywood kitsch, one should take very seriously the sacred, and he uses the word sacred here, the sacred intensity of the film, of the universe of the film, without which its extraordinary success cannot be accounted for. The power of the film resides in its obscenely direct staging of embarrassingly intimate fantasies. Who wouldn't want to have as a man, who wouldn't want to have a wife at least one generation younger than you, right? Consider more, and in that case of the Van Trapp family, he had, 6 or 7 children by his wife who died and then was replaced by somebody younger. I mean, how many trophy wives do you see men getting in the world today, right? It's a pretty common phenomenon, right? These are the successful men who actually achieved this fantasy that, what's his name? Fritzl also did, but in a different way with his own daughter. So he says this is obscene. It's a direct obscene staging of embarrassing intimate fantasies. Consider one more representative example. In the story, Maria, the main character, starts having feelings for Von Trapp and runs back to the convent. And the nun there gives her some pretty unique, not really Catholic advice in song. This is a musical, right? And the song that they sing is "Climb Every Mountain," which has, like, according to Zizek, and I think most people can probably see this, a pretty sexual undertone to that, right? Go back to your Von Trapp and climb every mountain. Have fun. This is a nun telling this to a novice who isn't going to come back. Do you see the connection and the imagery there?
Mountain, yeah.
Okay, glad to hear. So the pressing conclusion is that we are actually or potentially as bad as anyone on earth, and we constantly support bad or perhaps even evil policies regularly. We all suffer from small variations of the same psychic baggage, and it manifests itself uniquely in each and every one of us. So its manifestation might be unique, but it's the same thing. So if you've ever thought of marrying somebody, or even marrying somebody younger than you, or getting remarried or anything like that, you're just like these guys. It's the same drive. It's the same psychic baggage that's going through your mind. Any questions on that?
Sorry, say that last part again.
The psychic bag. If you've ever experienced the desire to date anybody outside of or like more than one person, or in succession, you're going through the same thing that this both the Sound of Music and this criminal Van Fritzl are experiencing. They just manifested their psychic baggage in different ways.
Yeah, so this is a very like psychoanalytic, Lacanian, Freudian kind of take on sexual behavior. But I mean, I feel like you could easily make a case, like, just from a biology perspective, that men would act this way, not from weird stories playing out in the head, in the mind, but just from normal sexual cues and normal sexual kind of like instincts, more instinct than anything else. You could make the same case, I think, for all of it.
You could, I suppose,
Because, like,
but then you've got this
females
black
that.
box. You don't have an explanation
Sorry?
of why the brain is thinking this way, right? I mean, we have action, and you're right. Scientists, brain scientists can't see the imagery in the brain, right? So in that sense, behavioral psychology, behavioral sciences would only look at the black box. We have a body, it does this. Why it's doing that is not important. We just look at the statistics. This is what's going to happen. You put the stimulus. This is what's going to happen 98% of the time or whatever. Psychology of the Lacanian kind is different. It looks at the mind and what's happening in there. So behavioral psychology is more like studying hardware. And I guess the psychology that these guys are doing, Zizek and Lacan, is more like studying the software. So although your brain may be identical, why is it that you're coming up with two different courses of action? And he's going to say it's in the libidinal excesses, the libidinal baggage. Each one of them can look at it and look at the other one and say they're crazy. But these guys focus in on the mind, which is very different from the brain, and somewhat less scientific now, I think, by most people's standards.
Yeah, but I mean, you could also go even further back and just say that, well, it's really the goal of all males of every species to spread their seeds as much as possible, and it happens to be that the younger 20 to 30-year-old females, or I don't know, 15 to 30-year-old females, are the ones that are the most child what's the word I'm looking for?
Likely to bear healthy children.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So
I mean, it just makes sense from that perspective too.
It could.
If you have the opportunity.
It could, but most mind psychologists would say that leaves a lot out. I mean, most of us are have lots of ways of subverting that and still enjoying the privileges or the benefits, right? We're talking birth control, romance, dating, and all that kind of stuff. Even hookup culture and apps. This stuff is it's a little bit beyond the biology. I mean, because a lot of people use it and still don't get pregnant, right? Birth control.
Yeah, because we're still designed. But we're still designed to go for those, to try to follow those instincts.
Then why do you use birth control? If you have this instinct to procreate, why are you?
So you don't have to pay. So you don't have to pay the consequences of following through with those instincts.
Yeah, but that's against your instincts, right? So that's the argument that they would say. If you are these mind guys would say towards the behavioralists, if your goal is procreation and that's where your instincts are, why are you subverting that? Why is your mind subverting that? And that's the interesting thing.
Because the mind's way, your brain's way of getting you to procreate isn't to say logically you're going to decide to procreate. It's to say you're going to be attracted to females, and females are going to be attracted to men, and you're going to have orgasms, and that's going to be the incentive to make you want to do that to get to the end goal. But it's not that your brain says. So it's kind of your brain's tricking you into getting there, rather than.
Yes, but why would it trick you, and why would it lead you that far and then subvert that? Why is it working against its instincts? That's the interesting question from the perspective of mind psychology, meaning looking at the software. So yes, you have all these. Assuming there was no mind, assuming there was pure brain, you would think that somebody would see a beautiful woman and try and have sex with her in order to procreate. Why doesn't that happen? Right? More appropriately, why does that happen and then get subverted? You have birth control. You have whole sources of ritual. You're not supposed to get pregnant until you get married, kind of stuff. That kind of stuff goes contrary to all the original stated claims that you're desiring to procreate. And that is where the richness of human life is, right? Romance.
But you don't desire to procreate. You desire to have sex. The procreation part is the result of your desire.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the intention. It's not your brain is getting you to have sex, not in order to procreate.
So procreation is the incentive and the end result from the perspective of impulses and stuff like that. So why does not everybody?
Oh, because social dynamics would make it. Society makes it. Yeah, culture gets in the way.
That's in the mind. That's in the mind. That's
Sure.
not in your body.
Sure.
So that's the interesting part from the mind psychology part, the Freudian part, or the Kantian part, or even Zizek's point of view here. And why he thinks that behavioral sciences of any kind have a place. It's sort of statistics. These guys who have a much higher pride or a much higher self-image seem to think that they often have the true cause and effect. But anyway, they've been wrong just as much as you, I'm sure. But anyway, so next chapter, it's called Acceptance. The cause we gain is the subtitle. I was a little disappointed. I was sort of expecting that he would tell us how to get to this world communist revolution. But instead, he's gives us a short little history of where we are, and then goes into says here's some snippets of what it might look like in the future. So let's start with the cause we gained. 3 events in 1968, 1989, and in 2005 can be viewed as progressive petering out of mostly failed revolutions. So in May 1968, students and trade unionists demonstrated, occupied, and went on strike, essentially bringing the French economy to a standstill. The result of this were wages were raised and a general election was called. The result of the election was the result of all this was a social revolution, but not a political one. Charles de Gaulle got back in, right? Everybody, there was no real change in power. He fled the country, interestingly enough, got back in, and everybody went back in because everybody just wanted their wages raised, and that was sufficient for them. Then, in 1989, this was the year I graduated from high school. That was pretty momentous. So, in 1989, the world experienced many pro-democracy revolutions in Poland, Hungary, East Germany, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and China. Later, and through to 1992, dictatorships fell in the USSR, Yugoslavia, Cambodia, Ukraine, Mongolia, South Canada, and many of these countries also broke apart later. The West's narrative was that communism was defeated. The West's narrative that communism was defeated was not true according to Zizek. And this gets back to our first session. Here he's sort of coming full circle. Dictatorship was defeated by parliamentary democracy. But what people want, so it's not communism and capitalism, it was dictatorship versus parliamentary democracy. But what people wanted was socialism with a human face. Okay? That's what failed. They didn't get that. Okay? So the 1989 revolutions undid the social revolution of 1968 because capitalism actually spread throughout the rest of the world. And capitalism is trying to squeeze the productive labor, to produce more and get paid less for the sake of profits, right? This became the worldwide modus operandi of all power, in a sense, right? So, 89 destroyed the social revolution of 1968. Then, in 2005, in France, rampaging riots in the suburbs of Paris gave us the start of a program-less, as in no program, violent protest, a lashing out that spread to and culminated in the Occupy Wall Street movement in the U.S. One can say that in 1968, 1989, and 2005 form a kind of Hegelian triad. The revolt of May 68 failed politically. Capitalism returned triumphant, but in a way won socially by thoroughly overhauling the substance bars in Paris suburbs, a kind of moment of truth for the entire movement. The revolt of '68 was quickly appropriated by the ruling ideology, so that its ultimate after effect was the overturning not of capitalism, but of the enemy of capitalism. That is really existing socialism, the second world, right?
Right.
In 2005, we got what remains of '68 once we subtract '89 from it. The realization of actual political potential, pure, irrational revolt without any program. That's what he claims is happening. So you've heard of synthesis, antithesis, or sorry, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right?
Yep. Hegel?
Hegel came up with that, and Marx sort of turned it around a little bit and used it also. This is what he's claiming is he's looking at. 1968 was a thesis, 1989 antithesis. You take one away from the other as opposed to actually synthesizing, you take away the best from each one of them, and you get nothing. You get this pure irrational revolt without any program. And that's the world we're living in. Major failure.
Right. Yeah, not disagreeing there.
The reason that there's no program to the revolt is because a program has proven to be beyond the imagination of nearly everyone. Because capitalism, and here it goes, is the first socio-economic order which detotalizes meaning. Detotalizes meaning. So remember when we were talking about how you take the authentic experience of people who are willing to die for their faith and turn it into a lifestyle choice? That's an example of detotalizing meaning. Right? It's no longer serious. So there is no global capitalist worldview. I mean, to think of that is almost corny. It's like, really? But it's also hidden there. It is there, but it's hidden. And the fact that it's unthinkable because people can't imagine it, or, I mean, we have a sort of name for it now, neoliberalism.
Yeah.
But
For capitalist realism.
It's a murky word, we don't really know what it means. It could mean anything to anybody. Some people are truly happy with it. Whereas communism, that has super meaning. I mean, it was very clear what that meant. Russia, or China, or America, Cambodia, or something. Whatever it was much more concrete. And in that hiding, capitalism or neoliberalism socializes its own meaning to its benefit. And we talked about the taking earlier in an earlier session. We talked about how economics today used to be called political economy. You take out the politics and you make it sound like there's no ideology here, but it is its own ideology.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's another example of detotalizing meaning. So, what this means is that the fundamental lesson of globalization is precisely that capitalism can accommodate itself to all civilizations, from Christian to Hindu or Buddhist, from west to east. The task is no longer just to replace the old one with a new one, but, here he posits, but what? And here's where I was really kind of disappointed in this book, because I was expecting, yeah, well, what? And he goes, the first indications are in art. What? So, what happens here, the rest of this book, and this is like literally the last chapter, he wants to give a hint of what the world needs to look like, right? And he's looking at art. The first indications are given in art. And the first one he looks at is Franz Kafka's Last Story. Josephine the Singer or the Mousehole. Have you heard of this one? I haven't heard of it until I read it. So Kafka, he's famous for like the trial and the castle, and talks about the bureaucracy getting its own, becomes so bloated and so frustrating that nothing ever actually happens. Anyway, apparently the last story that he wrote before he died, he called Josephine the Singer or the Mousehole. The story is a fairy tale. Okay? It's a fairy tale about a mouse singer, Josephine, who pipes rather than sings to assemble a mice in Kafka's socio-political utopia. His vision of a radical egalitarian and neo-communist society. People can be treated as celebrities, but not fetishized. So their admirers, in this case, Joseph's admirers, are well aware that there's nothing special about her. That she's just one of them. However, she thinks people admire her because she's an artist. But in reality, she's an artist only because people treat her as such. Right? In our world, I'm treated as a politician, not because I am one, but because people recognize that I am one. There's a subtle difference. I like to think it's because I am. What Zizek is saying here is that everybody is treated by society not for what they are, or what they appear to be in that society. And it's not intrinsic in that individual. Right? So somebody might say, I'm a doctor. No. Society's treating you as a doctor. Let's put you in 18th century France or in 16th century China, and let's see if you're still considered a doctor. You don't have the credentials because they weren't born at that time, right? They weren't born at that time. We may have to assume a leadership position, but that's the fundamental difference between our world and what we envision, or Africa envisions, as a better world. We don't fetishize people like this in any intrinsic reality beyond what they really are. So again, people treat her as such. So Josephine's belief in herself is perceived by the people as harmless and rather ridiculous narcissism, which this is what Kappa says, should be gently but ironically tolerated and sustained. So an artist, somebody's popular, somebody who achieves a leadership position for a particular role, it should be tolerated, sustained, not fetishized, gently. Right? This is how artists should be treated in a communist society. They should be praised and flattered, but they should not be given any material privileges like the exemption from work or special food rations.
Right.
And that's so Josephine at one point in the story tries to ask for that and deny it every time. So she says, okay, well, I'm not singing that. Nobody cares. Okay. Don't then. So what? That's how it should be, right? Is what he's saying. You don't blackmail the community. But not only that, you realize her particular position in the community is based there only because of the community's acceptance of you as that.
Right.
Not intrinsic. Now, it's true in others, but we like to think of it differently, right? I like to say I have job security for 4 years because that's what the law of the land is, and it's sort of just tolerated by the community. But it doesn't make anything special and change. The inauguration ceremony didn't do anything to change me physically or intellectually or anything like that. It was for the society. Does that make sense?
I mean, I think so.
Pardon?
I think so.
It's a slight whimsical thing. So he said it's there. It's just a little different. So, yeah, maybe it's not. So, this other one. Okay, so I spent a little time here on this next one. Unless you understand music, this went way over my head. So when I first got this, luckily there were some people who understood music and claimed that this is all correct. So we may go quite quickly over this next paragraph simply because I can't really speak to it, but I'm just saying.
I'm not musical either, so that's fine.
Okay. So another key feature of communist culture, the properly communist form of collective intimacy epitomized by Eric Satie's piano pieces.
Eric Satie, yeah.
You know him?
Yeah, there's a couple, he's got a couple good tunes.
Okay. So apparently Satie, during the early 1920s, was a member of the French Communist Party and served on its central committee. Zizek claims 4 musical innovations from Satie's work that made his music communist. First, in order to get the most elementary idea of communism, we need to forget all about romantic explosions of passion and imagine instead the clarity of a minimalist order sustained by a gentle form of freely imposed discipline.
Yes, that's what his songs are like.
Okay. So what SETI was aiming at was music which subverts a gap separating the figure from the background. When one truly listens to SETI, one hears the background. This is egalitarian communism in music. A music which shifts the listener's attention from the great theme to its inaudible background. In the same way that communist theory and politics reinforce our attention away from the heroic individuals to the immense work and suffering of the invisible ordinary people. That's his first innovation. A second innovation was identified by John Cage, whom Zizek quotes. This is a quote within a quote. With Beethoven, the parts of a composition were defined by means of harmony. With Satie and Webner, they were defined by means of time lengths. I'm sorry, I don't know what that means entirely, but apparently people who know music don't know what that means. John Cage went on to say that Beethoven was wrong to the lamentable and deadening of the art of music. Pretty harsh. But anyway, that's music. Beethoven would not get comments. A third innovation in Satie's work was identified by Constant Lambert. Zizek quoting him, again, this is a quote within a quote, by Satie's abstention from the usual form of development and by his unusual employment of what might be called interrupted and overlapping recapitulations, which cause the pieces to go in on themselves. He completely abolishes the element of rhetorical argument, and he succeeds in abolishing as far as possible our fine sense. I don't know what that means, but it sounded pretty good. And apparently, people who really understand music say, "Oh, yeah, that's right." Okay, so and finally, the fourth innovation. Instead of writing pieces in three was not just a mannerism. It took place in his art of dramatic development and was part of his particularly sculpturesque view of music. When we pass from the first to the second, and here's a funny word, I think it's French, we do not feel that we are passing from one object to another. It is as though we are moving slowly around the piece of sculpture and examining it from a different point of view. It does not matter which way you walk around a section. It does not matter in which order you play the three symphony.
Huh.
So if that meant anything to you, I hope your listeners
a little bit.
Let you know.
He's trying to get at.
What's that?
I think I get what they're trying to say. Like the order not mattering, and it's all kind of like interchangeable background, different kind of background music or whatever.
That's one big empty space in my life. I really don't understand that. Maybe someday. So, in concluding the book, Zizek asks, what should we do, given that we really only have three options? I hope that's allergy. Anyway, so we have three options according to Zizek. 1. Do nothing. 2. Prepare for a radically violent act or revolution. Or 3. Engage in local pragmatic interventions. The simplest answer is all three, because we never know what a simple act can do. So in the first place, that is do nothing. Power is not an objective state of things, which persists even if we ignore it. It is something that persists only when we participate with the participation of its subjects, only actively assisted by them. So he's saying we do not fear and obey power because of it, because it is in itself so powerful. On the contrary, power appears powerful because we treat it as such. Getting back to that mouse part thing, right? If we don't treat it as powerful, it loses it. Now, that's a hard thing to accomplish. So we really want collective action to do that, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, simply, but on a individual level, therefore, the simple support could be revolutionary.
Yeah, I think so. I think what he's getting at, what he's trying to do in the last chapter, sounds a bit like he's going back to kind of Marx's early work about, what it means to have a society without alienated labor, um, and what that might look like. And and Zizek obviously isn't building a path directly to that, but he's giving us a glimpse of what kind of a socialized labor world would look like, um, where we're not working for the sake of work, but working for ourselves, more or less, or at least some glimpses of that. But I disagree with his I think with his take on why those revolution. Okay, so what were the 3 years again he listed? 1968, 1989, and
2005.
wait, why was 2005 a year?
So something happened in France. There's riots in the suburbs, burning cars and stuff like that. And it's just it was the start, and it culminated later. So it culminated after the book was finally written. I think it's recall saying that this was the culmination of the 2005 stuff in the Occupy Wall Street, where there were people just screaming, yelling, and destroying things with no reason. So one of the things that he had pointed out, or that other dude pointed out, is that the Occupy Wall Street had no agenda. They had no demands.
Eventually they did, but yeah.
Well, that may have come out later, because I don't forget what they were. I also remember during the Occupy Wall Street seeing people trying to interview these people and saying, well, we don't agree with that person. This is what we want. And there's no unified collective idea.
Right. Well,
the notion of the 1%, but as being an enemy, but no real demands.
well, then it seems to me then that this is quite obviously a case where the Trotskyist position makes the most sense, where like all these failures are easily explained by just the lack of good leadership or the correct leadership. I mean, every time a revolution has come about, it's been led by idiots, basically, or anarchists, or social democrats who didn't have a real plan, who were going to capitulate to capital no matter what, or by Stalinists. That was the biggest problem of the 20th century, because every communist revolution was led by Stalinists. And so, I mean, it was obvious how they were all going to end. So, I mean, there's your problem right there. Bad leadership.
Well, yeah, and a failure of imagination is one of the things he said. You just can't imagine anything different.
Yeah. Which echoes what Mark Fisher was saying.
Pardon?
Which echoes kind of Mark Fisher. Capitalist realism.
Oh. Yeah, well, he didn't provide an actual answer either.
He didn't, but he talked a lot about the inability to imagine a better world or anything different.
Yes. That's where we feminist economics, like Marilyn Warren, imagine a really different world.
Right. Well, yes. But maybe, yeah. I think her imagined world now is a little more utopian and naive than she thinks. But we already had that argument.
Okay, so what kind of stuff would you like for next week or 2 weeks from now?
Well, is there anything on your list that you had been wanting to do? I don't have anything in mind. Yeah, we did mail.
Okay. But we done, did we do Gumshoe Han on negative arrows and problems with love in the modern world?
We did that in before the pandemic, but we haven't done that here.
Okay, let's do that one. That's an important one.
Okay. Yeah, let's.
So we haven't done on video. So Gumshoe Han, the agony of arrows. The destruction of the other as the singular cause of problems in the world.
All right. So if you're gonna tune in 2 weeks, viewers, then go ahead and pick up that book or find it online and read ahead so you can join in.
Very short, very dense book.
Very short and dense. Ooh, okay, that'll be good. All right. Well, thanks, Jeff. We're gonna end it now.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. Stream is